Hi, this is Professor Dr. Tuğba Karabulut from Istanbul Commerce University, and today we are having 30th Science and Society meeting, and our topic is the future of brands and branding, and we are welcoming a very well-known marketing professor, Professor Dr. Lane Keller'i, and we are happy that he's our host, he's our guest today, and our rector will make an opening speech. So welcome, Professor Keller'i, welcome, Yücel Hocam. So please start, Yücel Hocam.
Thank you very much. Dear Professor Dr. Keller'i, esteemed academicians, dear students, and distinguished audience online, welcome to the 30th of the Science and Society meeting series organized by Istanbul Ticaret University. We started Science and Society meetings in September 2019 in order to contribute to the scientific development of our academicians, students, and society by bringing together the most competent academicians of the world in many fields, students, and those interested in these fields. Today, we are organizing the 30th of the Science and Society meetings. Up to present, we hosted valuable academicians from the world's leading universities, including Harvard, Cambridge, Stanford, Spock, New York, Nevada, Massachusetts, and Ilmenau University of Technology. The doyens of many fields, from law to business and from entrepreneurship to communication, gave us valuable information and shared their knowledge with us. Today, Professor Dr. Lane Keller'i from Tax School of Business, Dartmouth College, will make us a presentation entitled Future of Brands and Branding. On behalf of myself and my university, I would like to thank him for accepting our invitation. He is really very generous and very kind. The issue of brands and branding has gone beyond the field of commerce and gained great importance in many fields. In today's world, given that there is competition not just in commerce, but in every field, even non-profit organizations feel the need to create a good brand if they are to gain a place in their field of activity. Commercial institutions are trying to increase their brand value by investing in social projects. Strong brands provide a sustainable advantage in today's increasingly difficult competitive environment as they facilitate the choice of consumers and target audience and create loyalty to the brand. In addition, stronger brands affect more positively the employment, innovation, and production. In this way, countries, states having strong brands develop more with strong economies. Today, Professor Keller'i will tell us about the future of branding. He is an academician whose academic publications have received more than 250,000 citations. It is really amazing for this field. He has served as a consultant to world well-known brands such as American Express, Disney, Ford, Intel, Levi Strauss, Nike, Procter & Gamble, and Samsung. I believe Professor Keller'i's presentation will widen our horizons in this field. Istanbul Ticaret University is taking firm steps towards becoming an important brand among foundation universities. We are happy to see that our university grows and develops day by day. Academic and cultural activities of our university, which aims to be beneficial to society, particularly the Science and Society meetings, will continue in these terms. Please keep following us. As I conclude my words, I would like to thank Mr. Keller'i once more time for accepting our invitation to participate in our program, giving this conference, and also Professor Tuğba Karabulut, our head of Department of Business and Administration in English, who organized the program. Thank you very much, and I thank for your patience to listen to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yücel Hocam. Dear Professor Keller, thank you one more time. It's my pleasure and honor to host you today. So I think you have a presentation and you would like to start with your presentation. So you can upload it if you want. Okay, thank you very much. You can start.
So great. Well, so let me start. And first, thanks for the kind words. I really appreciate that and all that you said. And just the opportunity, I think it's such an amazing thing that I'm actually sitting in. And for those of you who don't know maybe the US geography in a lot of detail, I'm in where Dartmouth is in New Hampshire, which is a state in the New England area or northeastern part of the US. So kind of between Boston and Montreal. Very pretty part of the country. I live out in the country, but yet here I am, being able to talk to you in Istanbul and other parts of Turkey. And I think that's so neat. And it's a country I certainly want to get to, haven't had a chance to, and it's on my list. So this is the next best thing, but hopefully it will lead to an actual trip then coming forward. So, but I do want to talk about brands and branding, and that is going to be our focus today, and certainly my specialty area. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually build off of, excuse me, a paper I wrote and was published recently in a special issue of the journal Consumer Research, which is one of our top marketing journals. And it really was sort of a chance to think about where brands are going and what some of the important themes or developments might be. I mean, very much my opinion. I think other people may see things differently, but a way for me to capture a lot of the things that I think matter. And I want to sort of start with really thinking about the future of brands and really the constant of change. If you think about it, the one constant in marketing is change. So there's always going to be change, and we always have had change. That said, in recent years, we've just had this phenomenal unprecedented kind of series of events. And part of this was ongoing, and that's the digital, I think, transformation that we've been experiencing for years. Although even with that, we're seeing more in very, very recent years. But obviously the pandemic and especially it varies some in countries. In the US, these next points, the kind of cultural changes, economic, we're obviously going through a period of economic instability with inflation and recession kind of looming. We've got lots of climate change and natural, as we experience this incredibly hot summer, it seems, all over the world. Lots of political, turmoil, the differences between the left and the right, and just social and racial, kind of unrest and turbulence in lots of countries. So there's a lot going on in marketing that we have to cope with, and we want to cope with, and will in different ways. So there's these powerful forces. Now, there is always a desire from at least for some stability, that as much as things change, people look for brands that actually provide some stability and help provide some reassurance, which I'm going to sort of talk about next. But we do have to factor in, I just want to, as a backdrop, what we're going to talk about is there's a whole lot going on that we need to factor in different ways as we think about brands and branding. So the thing about brands, they've been around for centuries, and, for a very good reason, and a very simple reason. They play really valuable roles. They serve a critical function. They create value for people, and the value may be functional and more performance related, or it can be more, social, cultural, psychological, more extrinsic, if you will, than intrinsic. But they enrich people's lives in certain ways. They make things go better for people. And that's why people look for brands, because they get that from them in their daily lives over time. So it's kind of hard to imagine a world where brands, at least viewed broadly, are not like a significant part of daily life. And again, brands viewed broadly there are all kinds of brands. Your university is a brand, or universities are brands, people are brands. So we can think of all kinds of brands beyond just traditional products and services. So it's the comfort and reassurance and just the kind of value that people get out of it is so important. And especially in times when people may be more fearful or apprehensive, the ability for that to happen. So, that said, the changing marketplace, all those factors we talked about, they are changing the marketplace, not to mention just generational and, there's always going to be change in consumer marketplace. It's going to mean that there's going to be alternatives that are going to emerge and have emerged and will emerge to traditional established brands. And that's going to change the market dynamics some. So new brands will emerge and they will be built in new ways. And we're seeing that happens, all the time, and all kinds of brands that are disruptive and really change marketplaces in little or sometimes really profound ways. So brands themselves may change, specific brands, the brands overall, and the value that brands create to people is, I think, something that's going to endure because of all of the what consumers, what people get out of brands as a result. So that's kind of, I just wanted to mention that because, it comes up a lot when we talk about the future of brands, like literally what's going to happen with brands. But I want to talk now more about branding and the kinds of things, if I have a brand, and, what kinds of things should I be thinking about going forward, and what's the future with actual branding itself. So let's think about that. So here's my agenda, and these are the topics we'll cover over the next 45 minutes, an hour, or whatever it takes. One's going to talk about brand elements, which is literally what the brand is. And underneath each of these, I have kind of the key message I'm going to want to get across. And so that's all on the screen, and that's something I'll talk more about in a second. Second is systems and platforms, and it's really trying to think more than categories and product categories and service categories in a much broader way, an expansive way in terms of what you're actually selling and what you're offering the marketplace. I'm going to talk about multiple channels, both channels of distribution as well as channels of communication and how they get integrated. I want to talk about consumer loyalty and how intangibles can be so important to strengthen that and create engagement. And I've got a couple models I want to share. I want to talk about sort of the future of your brand or a brand in how you can kind of manage your past, your present, and your future. And some very interesting opportunities there. And then brand stories and narratives, which is where you take that and actually how do you then you bring in maybe emotions and experiences as part of that, but how do you really tell a story and have a narrative around your past, present, and future? So I'm going to talk about how you tie all that together. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about market segments. Old marketing concept, but with a lot of relevance today. So I'll talk about that. So that's the plan. So let's start with the first one. And this is one, some people think this is all that branding is, and it's obviously not. Branding is a lot more than that, because it's a lot more than literally what you have as your brand. It's what you do with your brand and what your brand represents and what it means with people. But this is an important part. It's your trademarks. It's literally what we call brand elements, those things that you can trademark about your brand. And if you think about those, they are some of the ones that come into play. It is the brand name, it's the logo or symbol, it can be characters. Characters are becoming more prominent, and especially online, you can create different characters. Packaging, signage, slogans, those things you can trademark, and they help identify, which helps enhance brand awareness. And in some cases, they even have some meaning that may help you or facilitate you to create strong, favorable, and unique brand associations. And you just see I have a few, mostly international. I have a couple, or at least one, I think there are a couple that are more US based. But you recognize a lot of these, and they're around the world, and they're the brand elements. They're the logos, the names, and in many cases, there's slogans and other things that go underneath that. So there's a lot you can do to, in terms of choosing these elements and making sure you're getting the most out of these that you can. They're an important source of brand equity, And the more value you can get out of your brand elements, the easier it is for your marketing then to work and off of them and build off of them. So these are 6 criteria. And in my textbook, I've got a whole chapter, my branding textbook, with Vinita Swaminathan, and it's got a whole chapter on this. And we go through all this. The left-hand side is the more offensive, if you will, or brand building, where you're trying to create brand equity by being memorable, meaningful, and appealing. The right-hand side is a little more of the defensive. How do I kind of protect and transfer and adapt? And I put the adaptable in a box because I think that's the one change we're seeing now with brands that we didn't see before, is we're trying to make them a little more dynamic and a little more flexible in the marketplace. And a couple points here. I mean, one change that's happening, I'm seeing a lot of different brands. MasterCard just did this recently, and some other, Starbucks, where you're seeing a lot of simplification of the brand look, the logo. And part of that is because of phones. It's basically mobile. Because if I've got a very intricate or complex design on the phone, it gets so small and sort of squished down, I really can't see it that well. So people are actually simplifying their logos, in part recognizing how much mobile and how much smartphone usage and other things come into play. So that's an important realization, kind of a backdrop, that change, and updating, if you will, the equity. But this is a little different, this adaptable. And so the example here is, let's step back for a second. Here's an example. And this was Share a Coke, which I'm assuming was through Turkey at one point. This campaign, it was a global campaign that they started in Australia. And when they started in Australia, so the idea was share a Coke with friends and family, and they would actually have names on there. So there was Share a Coke. I don't know if Kevin was on there. I looked all over and I saw lots of names. I'm not sure I ever saw Kevin, but I'm guessing there's at one time there was a Kevin, or maybe your name too, in different markets. But it was a change for them. And when they proposed this in Australia, I know at headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia, in the US, there was, maybe some concern or some questioning whether, you should be doing this to your trademark, the famous Coke kind of trademark. And I think the learning of this whole kind of promotion and program was, it was actually okay on a short-term basis to make changes to your brand elements because of what you can do to create engagement and interest. And if you do it in a smart way and a way that reflects the brand strategy and positioning, it actually works pretty well. And that's what happened with Coke. So they actually made this global. They realized that it's okay to be flexible. So that's one of the lessons, I think, about brand elements, is this, that you're seeing more of how can we be a little more flexible? Because traditionally, there's been very strict brand identity rules and guidelines, and you really can't, there's not much flexibility. And I think now there's a feeling there can be more flexibility here. So just real quick on brand element guidelines, and then we'll move on and talk about other things. One is you use a collection of brand elements, and that's why the strong brands like a Red Bull, it's the name, it's the logo, it's the characters and the packaging, if you will, or the slogan, Red Bull gives you wings. All those created a lot of equity for Red Bull in its category. So you mix and match and try to get the best of both worlds and have a strong brand identity, a visual aesthetic and personality and character that characterizes you in the marketplace and guides you as you think about how to develop new things or update or change. Slogans are really important. Just, footnote on that is they're a hook or a handle to your positioning. So you devise a strategy to try to win in the marketplace with consumers and customers against competitors, help consumers out by giving them just a phrase or a sentence that summarizes that. So you can talk about BMW in the US, their slogan for decades has been the ultimate driving machine, or Visa, everywhere you want to be, that reinforces convenience and acceptability, but also aspirations and kind of more desirable places. So, a good slogan is just really, really powerful. And then understand the equity you do have So that way when you update properly, but then make sure that the brand elements stay relevant and engaging. It's okay to be a little flexible and dynamic, which is what I wanted to make the point with Share a Coke. So I want to start with this. We're going to go much deeper and much beyond this, but this is a good start point because this is literally your brand and how to think about it. And so I want to talk a little bit about that before we got into everything else associated with the brand and branding, which is where we're going to head next. So I will continue on. This is my second kind of observation and kind of theme, if you will, where I sort of see things going. And it really is about systems and platforms that more and more with brands, you're going beyond traditional products and service categories. You're expanding beyond that. You're adding complementary sets of products and services. It's almost an ecosystem, if you will, to satisfy customer needs. And this is classic marketing. And so it's great to see it happen because for decades we've been teaching in our textbooks, chapter 1 of every textbook, Kotler, Keller, and now Kotler, Keller, Chernoff, it always talks about marketing myopia or something like that, which is you don't define your business or your brand by just literally what you sell. It's the needs you satisfy, the benefits you supply, the problems you solve, which is much broader, which can encompass those products and services, but suggests more than that. And so this is so important, I think, to think about in terms of brand potential and what a brand could be and how you want consumers to think about your brand so that you're not defined very narrowly and they understand and appreciate what your brand can do for them in terms of their needs and wants and problems and dreams and goals and everything. So the idea is to transcend products and services. So to not just be defined by products and services. So defining your brand promise broadly in terms of needs and wants and benefits, in terms of satisfying and supplying. And then really creating these rich, rewarding customer experiences because that's ultimately what I care about. I'm not buying a product, I'm buying a solution, and that solution is something that I will experience as I actually use the product or service in some form. So it's the suite of integrated products and services. And again, one of the themes of a lot of the kind of writing I've done lately is talk about design and the importance of design and the kind of transformative power of design. And design has both a functional and aesthetic aspect to it. It's how a product works, but also how a product looks and feels. So very much a rational, emotional, functional and aesthetic. It's so important, those benefits. And that is part of what feeds into the platforms, the systems, the ecosystems, is that design element, how they all work together and how I'm creating a really holistic experience that's really valuable for consumers and customers. And it's funny, I teach a case in Google, and Google is a great example because Google, in many ways, could be defined in terms of search as it once was because it was actually used as a verb to search. You would tell people, well, just Google it. You wouldn't say necessarily, well, just do a search for it. You became synonymous, but yet they've managed through the way they've designed and created and integrated a real ecosystem that's more kind of your digital information infrastructure that allows you to collect, convey, all kinds of different information. So it's a fascinating example of this. So another example is one of my favorite brands, which is Nike. Which I talk a lot about. And they have, let's just start with their mission. Their mission is to bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world. And there's a little asterisk there by athlete, and it says, if you have a body, you are an athlete. So congratulations, we are all athletes here on this particular Zoom. But that's actually really important because it's saying, our mission is not just to satisfy like the world's elite athletes. It really is anybody who has body who wants to be active or should be active and we want to bring inspiration and innovation to them and for them, if you will. And, they've got a nice set of their vision and values. They've also talked about this on their website, in thinking of the mission and doing everything they can in terms of expanding human potential. So helping people become better in different ways, physically, emotionally, and what have you. And they talk about how they do that with their innovations and their products and their global team and the creativity and diversity they bring and the impact they want in the communities. So it really tells a nice story in part with some of the intangibles they offer for their mission, their vision, their purpose. And one of the things I love they talk about this in different ways, and they've had campaigns on this, but the notion of play, and if you let me play sports, and this was an old ad campaign. This was also part of a social cause and a corporate social responsibility initiative and program they had at one point, which was play, which is participate in the lives of American youth when they was years ago in the US and domestically. And the whole idea of in this case, gender women and all the benefits they get from sport and in just letting them, making sure they play, but also just more broadly, playgrounds and fields and playing fields that they would help donate and try to improve so that kids in particular, but everyone for that matter, to some extent, could be more active and do it in a very community grassroots basis. So I just love that because it kind of really spoke to their mission and spoke broadly. We're not just selling shoes. We want people to actually experience and appreciate and enjoy and benefit from the rewards, if you will, of sport in all forms, whether walking or competing or whatever it might be. And so they've really moved to this kind of, their innovations. It's now more of an ecosystem of engagement that they create around their products and services, which is where they started. And they sell a whole lot of clothing and shoes and equipment and in a lot of different sports to a lot of different people in a lot of different countries. And now they're wrapping in around a lot of digital, if you will, to help create community, create more personal accountability, but also then personal kind of leadership where I can then try to be better myself through information I'm gaining from Nike or others. And they've got customization with Nike ID and sneakers. They're for the hardcore Nike fans who want the latest and greatest and all that they do here. So it's just really interesting how they're taking Just Do It, which has been their slogan for decades now around the world, and saying just do it and we'll help you, because they're now getting more active in terms of actually collaborating, if you will, which is all part of this ecosystem of engagement. So which I think is a really neat idea. So the goal here is to transcend products and services. It's to take category leadership, if you will. And if I'm a brand, that I want to be, and again, at the heart of a great brand or service or a great brand are great products and services. And I firmly believe that you don't want to fall into the trap of thinking that all products and services are commodities or all brands are commodities, because you can always differentiate. And especially if you think about transcending and you're thinking about more an ecosystem, there are a lot more ways you can think about how to satisfy customers' needs and supply benefits in ways that others are not doing. And that's where some of the great brands or some of the newer, I think, great brands are coming around. And you're seeing that in different ways, in different categories, which has been fascinating to kind of watch. And the other thing is it's being a chief protagonist of your category. I always thought Starbucks, and I've heard that from their leaders and Howard Schultz and others who were leaders there talk about this in different ways, but the notion of being the chief protagonist of the coffee category and embracing all that makes what you sell good and how it helps people, and embracing it both in conveying that, but also doing things to make sure you're delivering on that. And being seen as really credible within your category and within that broader, again, it's the category defined broadly, it's the needs and wants that you supply and the benefits that you satisfy. So, and it's creating expertise, trustworthiness, likability. Those are the three dimensions of credibility, which are so important. You're good at what you do, you have my interests in mind, and I just like spending time with you. You're interesting, you're fun. I like you as a brand as much as I would like you as a person. So, that's the chief protagonist. Chief protagonist kind of waves the flag of the category, leads the way, if you will. And I like that because that's the notion you're transcending that category. You're actually thinking about it in an ecosystem in terms of a system or platform. All right, so that's a second one I want to talk about a little bit, which is, thinking, we started with brand elements, moved to talk about products and services more as a platform, more as systems, and recognizing the breadth of that with all the brand extensions and how you expand. And you can think about Nike and Google, and there are lots of other brands that fall into that. So let's talk about now a little bit on the go-to-market and where that's going, and what are some of the trends and what's the future look like there. And it's obviously multiple channels. There's just more and more ways I can communicate to consumers. There are more and more ways I can sell to consumers. So it's trying to figure out how to integrate that in a smart way and recognize I have all these options, but I've got to figure out which are the right ones and how do I use them? And most importantly, how do I combine them so they work together? So this is a little schematic I use just to illustrate. So again, at the center, we have our product and service systems and platforms we talked about on that second theme. And then if you think about it, then the vertical axis is kind of the distribution axis. And there's classic push in terms of direct and indirect channels where I sell directly myself. And obviously you're seeing that so much now through the pandemic. So many companies had to go this way and figure out ways to sell online and in different forms. And then indirect channels where, more traditional maybe, where there's this retailers, distributors, et cetera. And then there's the pull side, which is the communication side, customer focused. And I've got personal communications and a lot of different ways I do that, and digital being a huge one. But also there's a lot of opportunities with mass, advertising, promotion, events, experiences, public relations. So I've got to integrate this. That's the key. So I have to think about how do I want to balance all these. And this could be, the one thing I realized as I was putting this talk together, each one of these could be a seminar by themselves. So we are going to highlight things a little bit because there's so much depth here. So I'm definitely going to highlight this one, and I'll tell you a little bit about how I'm going to do that. So I want to focus on integrated communications, which is an area I've been interested in since I was at Stanford in the late 80s and started teaching advertising and communications and marketing communications. It became, how do I integrate all these different things? And it's even more true now, given all the online and digital options I have, either at home or with a phone somewhere that might be. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of go through this at a very high level. And what I'm going to do is, if you are interested, I published a paper with an outstanding academic at the University of Michigan named Rajiv Batra. And we published this, I think it was 2016 in the journal Marketing, which is one of the top marketing journals there. And it really was all about how to integrate marketing communications. And I just want to explain the logic of what we did. And if you're interested in the details, then that article summarizes it all, and you can track it down, or if you have any trouble, let me know. What it says, look, consumers kind of go on a decision journey. It's the way to think about how they progress through things. And it's not as linear as it once was. And so you need to understand that, one. Two, you have communication objectives that you would like to achieve as a brand marketer along the way. And you want to make sure that's happening. And then three, the communication platforms or options are the ways you make that happen. You have a lot of choices to do there. So I need to understand kind of all three: consumers and their journey, my objectives in terms of brand marketing, and then the different platforms. And so the next three slides outline each of those 3 points. Here's the stages we talked about in our article. You can think about them differently, but it starts at the beginning where somebody, for whatever reason, decides they have a need or a want, and then start learning and developing maybe a little awareness about some brands and starting that process, which ends at the end with purchase and are they satisfied, and are they become loyal? Do they become advocates and become really engaged? Those things. And at any time, somebody in that journey, and I say, your brand's not for me. And therefore they reject and they go off, and they may circle back and you may get them again. So it's all this dynamics of thinking of these stages in a more complete way, in a more dynamic way in terms of how they may cycle and the kind of feedback you might get. So that's one. And then two are the objectives you may have along that journey. And as I'm building my brand and I'm trying to develop you as a loyal customer, I'm going to start with awareness and salience, and then from there go through there's many things I want to do, and I have another model coming up which I'll talk more about that kind of takes this and frames it in a certain way. But these are literally from the beginning, where I'm just trying to create some awareness, to the end where I'm trying to actually create engagement and connections in different ways with me and the customer with other customers. So that's two. And then lastly, three is I have different communication platforms I can use. And there are 8 main ones that we talk about in the textbook. And there's advertising, which comes in many different forms. There's promotions, which again comes in many different forms, as do all of these. Events and experiences, PR and publicity, excuse me, digital, which has all, social media, websites, search, banner ads. I mean, there's a lot of different components here. Mobile, which is different from digital, and that's important. I think, when a lot of that was first thought through and understood, it was more desktop and laptops and then tablets and now phones. And I think recognizing and understanding that what works on phone, the behavior and how people sort of use the phone and how it works is just different. So you have to factor that in some. And that's true with all these. So all of these have down to direct and database marketing, personal selling, just ending in a much where I get very personal with somebody, very focused and maybe more customized. They all have pluses and minuses. I mean, there's nothing magical about any one of these. They all have strengths and weaknesses. So the key again is to balance them. So that's 3. So this is the model, and it's probably, especially if you are watching this on your phone, it's probably hard to see. But basically what this says is it sort of says, look, stages of the consumer decision journey, that's on the bottom. Then I have my objectives, which I can kind of line up depending on where you are in the journey. And then I have the platforms. In the platform itself, some of the platforms, the options of those major communication platforms, some work better with some objectives better than others, and trying to align them. So that's the spirit of this model. And there's a top down and bottom up. So all of that. So anyway, the point is, and this is only communications, omni-channel has some of the same characteristics. It's all trying to figure out, how do I integrate these in a smart way and take advantage of the strengths and weaknesses, mix and match in a way that makes sense. All right, so that's 3. So that's a little bit of go-to-market. Now I want to share with you, talk a little bit about building loyalty. And I'm going to work through some models and some principles and some other things. But very important, which is sort of thinking about, how do I strengthen loyalty beyond repeat purchase, beyond somebody who just chooses to buy me and consume me and that's it. So I'm going to start with positioning. Positioning is one of the most important marketing concepts, and I do have a model I really like, and I've used it in my textbooks. I've used it with the companies I've worked with. Many of them have adopted this, in different ways at different times. So let me just highlight the spirit of this, and just kind of just illustrate with a quick example maybe. But you got to find your competitive frame of reference. Positioning is if I want to think about loyalty, I got to start with, how do I want people to think and feel about me? Kind of bringing them in. I got to define my frame of reference. Who am I competing with? Which is in part, who am I targeting? Because that's going to dictate that. And then there's the concept of points of difference and points of parity. And let me explain both of those. The points of difference are those strong, favorable, unique brand associations. They're what separate you from competitors. You have to have those to be a brand. That's the essence of branding, is that differentiation. And the kind of the 3 criteria are kind of the classic 3 C's of marketing, which is, the customer, the company, and the competition. So desirable from a customer or consumer point of view, deliverable by the company or the brand point of view, and then differentiating from a competitive point of view. So the classic 3 C's. You need all three to have points of difference. So there's a lot there that we can talk about. And then at the same time, we got to break even. There are areas where we want to make sure we have parity. Doesn't mean we're exactly equal, but we're close enough so that we negate any of our weaknesses. We negate the advantages a competitor may have. So all to make sure that there's no reason, why not. We want to give them reasons why, but also make sure there's not a, why not thing that they can sort of use against me in some way as my brand. So you need both, parity and differences. And that's really important. It's a way to think about positioning in a very competitive way, in a very much a decision-making kind of way. And then lastly, you kind of put this together in a short brand mantra, which is like a 3 to 5 word expression or phrase that captures the essence of the brand and mostly the points of difference. And it's really internal, the slogan's external, but it's to really make sure everyone learns inside the company, and anyone working directly or indirectly with the brand appreciates this. So Nike, again, I'm going to go back to the Nike example. They have some points of difference, they would say, against the marketplace as a whole, and it varies to whatever, to different degrees, different competitors. Some are more intrinsic, kind of performance related with innovative technology and the quality and stylishness of their products, and just performance and how they help people perform. Then there's some that are a little bit more extrinsic, that are not, as closely tied to the direct product performance, but more how I feel and more intangibles. And that's the self-empowerment, just do it kind of ethos or attitude, and the inspiration they try to bring, and just the joy and rewards of sports, that they really feel that what they and how they represent that and how they support that is unique, maybe versus some other brands. And then they have parity about being responsible and contemporary and up to date and having good value because they're premium price. So all those are real important to make sure they're not losing somehow. And their mantra is, it was for years, authentic athletic performance. So authentic suggesting the realness, if you will, the genuineness of the brand, and athletic performance, putting some guardrails around that. So I have some other examples. I'm going to skip over these, but I just want to start with this because this is such a core idea. So we could do this with Starbucks. We could do this with Red Bull, which we talked about earlier. And we could do this with Google in some ways. And again, there's their mantra, simple, powerful digital ecosystem. We talked about that earlier. So part of what makes that brand special is you can do lots and lots of different things, but it's pretty easy to do. And normally when you do lots of things, it's kind of hard. So they best of both worlds, and that's what makes a great brand. So the second model I want to share is this brand resonance model. And this kind of takes this model and puts it in a framework, the positioning about how, not just how a consumer thinks or feels about me, how actually do I build relationships? So it goes beyond just sort of the thinking and feeling and where I'm located in their minds to how do they actually, what they actually want to do with me and what do they do with me? So, it's the resonance model. It's the notion is all, marketers like to build strong brands, lots of customers. And when resonate is when customer feels in sync, like a connection with the brand. It's like intense act of loyalty. There's really, when the word resonate, the English word resonate, just there's like this connection, and you really connect. And that's, as a marketer, that's what I want. I want customers to feel that with my brand. So what my model has a ladder and some building blocks that I use. So let me just talk about those a little bit. So the left-hand side is kind of the steps, if you will, the ladder. And it starts with the 4 questions you would ask a brand, you would ask a person the first time you met them, like, who are you, identity, what are you in terms of meaning, what about you in terms of response, and relationships, what about you and me? That's going forward. Are we friends, business partners, whatever it might be. If it's a person, if it's a brand, what am I going to do with you? So that's the goal is obviously to try to build, to get to relationships where I actually have people who have loyal relationships and are intense and active about that. But the argument is, what the model says, is you can't just go there. You have to earn that. You have to build the right kind of knowledge and experiences with consumers. So each of these 4 levels, there's some specific things. I won't get into detail because I want to make sure we have time for Q&A. So I'm going to move along here. But you can read about this. Salience is really important. And I've talked about this for 20 plus years, about deep, broad brand awareness, making sure people think about you easily and often, all the right times, all the right places, and all the right ways. And then from that, you go to performance and imagery, which is the points of parity, points difference. We talked about the intrinsics and extrinsics I showed you with those different brands, left-hand side, right-hand side. Judgments, feelings, head and the heart. Resonance is when I feel intense, active loyalty. I feel an attachment. I feel community. I want to get involved with the brand in some ways, ideally. In the left-hand side is the more rational route, and the right-hand side is the more emotional route. In the next few slides, we can skip over. These are some of the details of the model. And then, the whole thing is you can ask a series of questions about the model in terms of each of those levels. Are you doing the right things or not? And how can I do a better job at salience or points of parity, points of difference, or judgments and feelings, or the actual relationship. So that's that model. And I wanted to talk about that some because it's a model I found very useful. And I think going forward, I think more and more brands need to kind of encompass all of those different characteristics and features going up the left-hand side, the right-hand side, the rational, the emotional, I think is really important. I'm going to talk more about that in these next few slides. So now this is the 5th theme. And this is about brand intangibles. It's tapping into the past, defining the present, and mapping out the future of the brand with consumers. It's giving them a narrative and a timeline, the ingredients of that. We start with emotions and experiences. That's kind of the transition from the previous theme and the resonance model to this one, which is, and you want to link those emotional rewards to your products and services. You want to make sure it taps into all the tangibles and intangibles you have. So the emotions are important, but they want to be part of other things you do. They don't live by themselves, if you will. And then I think it's interesting. We're obviously pandemic has made this really, really hard, but having real world physical sensory experiences, I think are going to be really important. I think digital has its benefits, but there's nothing to me like an in-person experience and being able to actually full sensory to experience it the way you can. It's going to be interesting with virtual reality and all kinds of other things where you land in between, but there's always going to be something special about that. So I think there's a lot of online, offline combinations going forward. We're going to, as marketers, we're going to think about. But this is, in general, emotional rewards, and then some really rewarding brand experiences are important. But you also have, every brand has a past, it has its present, and it has its future in terms of where it wants to go. And managing that correctly, connecting to your past in terms of your history and heritage, and importantly, how has it shaped who you are as a brand and who you are as a company? How has it helped you and enabled you to do certain things? And your present, as a result of all of your past, what exactly, in terms of your values and personality and character, what is it that you, because of who you are and everything else, or what you've done, who you are, what are they? And how does that influence how you think, feel, and act? We're all a function of our roots, where we came from. But so we want to tell that story, but also what other things might go into our values, personality, and character. And then you can point to your future, which is the mission, vision, and purpose, which I illustrated with Nike a little bit earlier, in your potential and how not only you're making a difference now, how you'd like to make a difference in the future, and maybe a bigger difference and maybe a better difference as a result. So I just wrote a paper on this. I'm going to send it off to the Journal of Brand Management. It'll get published either later this year or early next year. But it just looks at these dynamics and thinking about managing your past, present, and future, and connecting them and telling a story and a narrative, which is going to be our next theme. Okay, so tying all this together in a really compelling brand story and narrative. And I just think the strongest brands have a really compelling account. They have a way of telling their story about who they are, their origins, how they grew over time to become what they are now, and then what they see as their destiny and what they want their destiny to be in terms of what they'd like to become. Or just to read what I have below, need to articulate how your past informs who you are now and who you would like to be and what you would like to be in the future as well. So your present state informing your future plans, if you will. And I think this is so important for so many brands to be able to do this. And it really, if you do it well, you're going to come across as more authentic, more credible. You're going to create more community because people are going to feel like they know you better. So there's a lot of opportunity here to develop these stories and narratives in this kind of timeline sort of way. And it is, I mean, the headline's probably a little too strong because I don't know if it's a fundamental revision, but it certainly gets you thinking differently about positioning in terms of points of parity, points of difference, for example. So, and here's the way I see this. So I see this as there's kind of a top-down and bottom-up way to think about your brand and how you want people in the marketplace to think about it. And the bottom-up is very much points of parity, points of difference, because that is where you're trying to lay out your competitive advantages, where you're negating your competitive weaknesses or vulnerabilities, all to influence consumer decision-making. So it's very, and which is hugely important. You're trying to affect the inputs and the weights that people give as they make decisions. It's going to be part of your positioning. The brand stories and narratives, in the way I describe them, in part because of your past, present, and future, it can be more than that, can frame the key elements of what you mean and the meaning that you have in a really memorable, persuasive way that kind of wraps around those points of difference, points of parity, that maybe strengthens them, gives them credibility. They're what are called sometimes as proof points, but provide rationale, or in some cases just are additive and really add another dimension. So I really see combining those two, but in a way where it's really cohesive and the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, that there's so much sort of synergy and integration in the way it all fits together. The story I'm telling about my past, my present, my future, my history and heritage, my values, my character, my personality, my mission, my vision, my purpose, my points of difference, my points of parity, all that hangs together in a way it's really compelling that makes people get what you're doing, understand why you are different than anybody else and why they should care. So it is, I think, a more comprehensive and cohesive way to package brand strategy. So this is the direction I've been going. And I think going in the future, I think you're going to see maybe more brands move in this direction. So here's my last one, and then we'll stop for questions and other things. And this is really understanding the individual differences that exist across this consumer market you might have and developing more effective marketing programs across key market segments. It's kind of a classic marketing concept for sure. We talked about segmentation, targeting, and positioning for decades. Decades. But it's just like integrated communications. I was talking about that 40 years ago, or so almost when I was at Stanford, I was talking about this, and yet here we're still talking about it. And and that's because things change and there are different aspects to consider. One and two, they're hard. These are some hard things to solve. So the realization you're going to see a lot of heterogeneity, and I think you're going to see that in the coming years. And therefore, you're going to see more personalization, trying to recognize how consumers are different, but especially how can I help one consumer and an individual consumer, each consumer kind of get more of the functional, emotional, and social benefits that they want from my brand. So figuring out ways to do that is different from just the mass market where one size fits all, if you will. And I think the individual differences, finding ways to personalize and customize. I showed you Nike had Nike ID with the shoes, and you can do lots of stuff now digitally. ways to experience Nike on an individual basis. And I think that's really important. Some of the differences that are going to really guide the segmentation part of the story is certainly diversity and inclusion. That's a huge issue in many countries around the world, certainly in the US, in understanding differences racially with ethnic identity, cultural affiliations. But there's also kind of some classic, other dimensions that separate consumers in terms of age and demographics of various kinds and attitudes and behaviors, and just recognizing that. And the one I want to focus on today that we could talk about, again, any one of these we could spend a whole seminar on. But I want to talk about brand engagement a little bit because it's a really crucial moderator out there in the marketplace. And I want to share with you, this is a model I have, a brand engagement pyramid. And it recognizes that your customer base has this, if you want to think about it, there's some consumers who are really engaged. They love your brand. They just can't get enough of it. They want to talk about it. They want to go online and blog about it or whatever it might be. But there aren't as many of those because as compared to at the base of this pyramid, which is those consumers who are not that engaged with you and maybe not at all engaged. They just choose you, use you, that's it. Purchase, consumption, done. And that's what we do with a lot of brands. If you think of all the brands you encountered today, Wednesday, August 3rd, I guess, that is the case that, we often, that's just the way it is. We can't spend a lot of time on a lot of brands. We decide which ones. So as a marketer, you got to think about what's the shape of your pyramid? How many people are at the top? How many people are at the bottom? What are the flows of information across? So this one, you notice there are arrows both within the levels vertically, but also, across the levels vertically and within the levels horizontally. So there may be communications among the casual consumers, among the hardcore, like the sneakers we were talking about with Nike. But we're also going to get that across the different levels too. And that's the trickle down. Do the really engaged, the ones who are really involved, they're somehow influence those who are less involved, and especially maybe the moderate ones. Or is the feedback go the other direction, and maybe the consumers who are very engaged don't always like all the consumers who don't care as much about the brand as they do, or want to do things differently with the brand than what they want. So you've got to understand these flows. And then the arrows on the left side is, how am I going to market to these different levels? And the mistake is to focus too much on one versus the other, too much on those really engaged, go heavy on social media and ignore those who are not on social media for your brand, but yet are a very important source of volume and revenue for you at the base of the pyramid. Vice versa. I don't want to ignore those at the top because they may have all kinds of benefits in terms of the influence they create, the halo they create around my brand. So there's lots of different questions here, and that's what these next slides kind of list. So I kind of highlighted them, so I'm going to skip over these next set. And just to relate this back to our brand resonance pyramid, brand resonance was all about brand building. It was saying, how do I get somebody who's not a customer to learn about my brand, get salience and performance and imagery, and then, head in the heart, start feeling some and thinking positive things, and then ultimately resonance. This is more about taking the resonance piece, some of which people have very, very, very low resonance, and they're at the bottom of the engagement pyramid, and some who are high. How do I manage the different levels of loyalty, if you will? So, and again, this is just an example. Nike, I think, does this really well. They call it the pyramid of influence. But what they do is they have, back to the top athletes, they recognize the different layers and levels, if you will. And if you have a body or an athlete, that's the base. And there are a lot of people down there, and they market some, see the arrow on the left directly to them. But they also recognize there's some trickle down influence, and a lot of it. And they, whether it's Serena Williams and LeBron James, tennis, basketball, famous athletes. So there's a lot they do here to try to manage this. And I do this with these kind of pyramids. Often you can that vertical dimension. This case, it's about athletic performance and athletic interest and athleticism. I could also talk about Dockers as a pants that Levi Strauss has. how fashionable do they want to be? LL Bean is actually a New England brand, much more about outdoors. How adventurous they want to be in the outdoors. There's some hardcore outdoor brands. There's some hardcore fashion brands. Both Dockers and LL Bean probably don't want to be at the very, very top of the pyramid of fashionability and outdoor adventureness. But you need to have those discussions about where are you going to play, how are you going to market. There's some really, really good discussions you can have around these customer pyramids. And I've been using this more and more in different ways. All right, so let me wrap up so we have time for Q&A. So here's some of the things I talked about in this session. I hope it went okay. I hope the English wasn't too hard to listen to for an hour. I hope my English, I know I talk kind of fast, sorry, but
that's fine. That's fine. We can understand.
I'm fine. There we go. I'm glad to hear that. Okay. Sometimes I know I talk fast. I get all excited about these topics. But understand the appropriate product scope and meaning and depth, rate, breadth, and relationship of your offerings in terms of platforms and systems. And it's a really, really key issue. And then this whole distribution, omni-channel and communication channels and how to blend them in the most positive way, really, really important. I think that's one of the hardest ones in marketing, but you've got to be as smart as you can be there. And then these brand intangibles, emotions, experiences, but past, present, future, and telling them in very, narratives and stories. It's so important in branding to take the first point, which is product scope and meaning and the benefits you're supplying and all that. But there's going to be a lot of intangibles that connect to that or add to that in different ways. And then lastly, just understanding and embracing customer heterogeneity. I think so often we talk about customers and people use personas and prototypes and what have you. And it's, the customers are so diverse, and how are you going to reflect that? And using customer pyramids or other things might be helpful. So the major theme, if I step back to the article I wrote, one of the things I said is there's so much multiplicity in what we can do as marketers. I mean, it just keeps, we have more and more options, but there are also more and more heterogeneity with consumers. There's so many ways they're different and want to be different. So we've got to think about how to find really smart integrated solutions that kind of find ways to balance and blend the multiplicity and the heterogeneity, pull that together. I think that's really a key goal. And I think the one, these are some of my last, slides. The good branding, to me, it's an art and a science. I've always felt that. And you've got to be analytical and systematic, and you've got to have the right tools and concepts and frameworks. And that's what and I shared some of those. But you've got to know how to use them. And that's where the art part comes. And some of it's being creative and inspired, and it's just and being smart. It's just guided by your philosophy, how you have learned about how brands work in the marketplace, how consumers, think, feel, and act in the marketplace, and how to apply these in the right way. And that's the key, because anyone can get the tools. It's how you use them. And I really think with experience and learning from what other brands do and what you've done with your brand, one of the benefits I've had is I've worked with so many different brands. It's really helped me with that. So with that, I'm just going to thank you so much for spending your evening with me, which I appreciate. I know it's late there in Turkey, but thank you for doing that. And I wish you all luck, and I hope this was productive, and we have plenty of time to talk about some other things. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'll start listening some and seeing what you have to say.
Thank you very much, Professor Keller. You are very kind. You prepared a very nice presentation. I appreciate. Let's get some questions. We have an associate professor. Pınar Hoca, would you like to ask a question, please?
Hello, Professor Keller. I really appreciate your presentation. It was very valuable for us. I want to ask, what kind of trends are we going to observe in the following years? Because you also, in your last slide, mentioned the analytics and systematics, they gain importance. So the new tools are facilitating the marketing strategies. and what kind of trends can we observe? Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, great question. So thanks. And I'll answer that kind of in two ways. And so one is, I've talked a lot about, and this has been in the textbook for maybe 10 years now. The big forces, I think, that affect brands and marketers around the world, the kind of three major forces. We talk about social, and by social, we mean very broadly. So that includes the environment. There are all those things that are more, that kind of relate to corporate social responsibility, environmental, ESG, if you will, if you know that term. One. Two is technology, powerful force. And I'm going to come back to that. The third is global. And global is something, we've come a long way, and it's amazing how connected we are. There's still things that, that's still a powerful force. There's still things that brand marketers need to do and learn, et cetera. But I'll come back to the second one, on the technology. And it's a fascinating one, because right now we're getting, if I look at it, customers now have never had so much information about companies and brands and all of that. You can learn so much. Companies and marketers have never had so much information about consumers and customers and what they think. So in some ways, you would think, and you would hope, with all this information both sides now have, ideally you would find better solutions, and I'm going to get more value, and the company's going to get more value, because we're going to find ways to connect and take advantage of that information, this extra information. That's the hope. Now, I'm not sure that's going to, where we are on that. I think it's a process, and I think it will take time. But I think that's the key, is how you use that information in a way that makes the most sense for both sides. I provide information, I get information in ways that help create good, responsible exchanges, if you will, between a company and a customer. And the one thing I worry a little bit about, so the one thing, if I have any watch out, just a general one, is, one of the things that happens, we have so much information about people's online behaviors and what they do and where they go and what they do. And so it gets to be, we have very reactive programs where we're just trying to put our brand in front of people so they see it in certain times, in certain places. And it's very behavior oriented. It's not really understanding why are people doing things, what are they thinking and feeling. I'm only seeing and understanding consumers in a very limited way. And there's a little bit of this that reminds me of what happened 20 years ago. And 20 years ago or so is when scanners came in. And all of a sudden we had all this information about people from scanners at supermarkets, where we were in grocery stores, where we were collecting data on what people bought and all these things that were part of this. And so then all of a sudden people started dropping lots of coupons and seeing, wow, coupons, I drop a coupon and I see my sales go up, but I'm not really building a brand. I'm not really necessarily creating stronger loyalty in some ways. I'm just sort of getting a behavioral response to a discount. And that's the thing I worry a little bit about with some of the more programmatic buying and other behaviors that are associated with the current kind of digital marketing that happens, is that it isn't getting into the consumer psychology deep enough and finding ways to make sure that you're not just chasing people around in their behavior, as we did with scanner data and coupons, and learned that wasn't a great way to build a brand. And a lot of companies recognize the mistakes of that time, 20 years or so ago, but that we're falling into some of that same trap now. So that's the one theme I think about as I go about with social, which is tons of issues about sustainability and everything with brands and products and other social issues, technology and global. On the technology, the digital piece, it's so much opportunity, there's so much upside, but there's also a downside, and the downside is just being very reflexive and reactive, if you will. So anyway, long answer, but it was a good question. So I guess that's why I got a long answer.
Thank you for your answer, Professor K.
Thank you. Sertaç is our PhD student, and he's writing a thesis about marketing, and he's working in McDonald's, Turkey. So Sertaç, would you like to ask a question?
It's good afternoon, Professor. First of all, welcome to our school and thank you for your time and very informative presentation. It's a pleasure to meet you, first of all. So my question is about digitalization. Could you give an example case about the effect of digitalization on branding? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about digitalization, I mean, I think the whole notion of trying to take your brand and moving it online and trying to create a presence, if you will. I mean, I think if it's done right, to me, it's sort of, I'm going to go back to Nike a little bit, if, you know, not to, in part, because I think it's easier to build off the same example. But if you go a little deeper in what I shared with you and talked about, so one of the things they're able to do and what digitalization can do is I can now offer benefits I couldn't offer before. So now I can offer benefits of actual feedback in terms of performance to allow you to track and see how you're doing as you exercise and things like that. I can actually offer benefits of, I can give you tips. I can do podcasts and information. If you want to be a great tennis player, great soccer player, I can give you all that now. And I can connect you to those people, or I connect you to other people who are kind of in the same position you're in. So those are the sorts of things Nike sort of thinks about. So the way I look at digitalization cuts across all aspects of marketing. It's how I sell in terms of channels. It's where I sell, you know, in terms of channels. It's also how I communicate in terms of, you know, my communications. But it also affects fundamentally my value proposition and what it is and how I'm creating value for customers. And some of it may be taking the benefits I offered before and just figuring out a way to do them digitally. Other cases, like Nike, I'm actually figuring out ways to sort of supplement and add more value or expand my value proposition in ways by taking advantage of digital means and mechanisms to do that. So that's the thing I'm always kind of thinking about. Obviously, there's pricing too, and dynamic pricing and some other things. But the core to me is that offering and how I sell it and where I sell it. And that's where digitalization kind of comes into play. And I just use Nike as an example because I think it, from our, you know, what we were talking about before, it just ties in nicely to your question and thinking about how they're just adding value. And to me, that's the nice thing about digitalization is, you know, beyond how I sell and everything else, it's just fundamentally my value proposition changes because I'm creating benefits in ways that I wasn't able to do before.
Thank you.
This is actually my dad's question, and he's wondering, while you're writing a book by yourself or with another co-author, what is your working methodology? Okay, how do you decide which subjects to include, and how do you just evaluate the trends and so on? Okay.
Yeah, no, that's a challenge, and it's one of the things. You know, we're trying to keep the book as short as possible because our students appreciate that. But the challenge is marketing is such a big field and there's so many developments and there's so many interesting examples. So this actually is where the thing I learned this 20 years ago when I first started working with Phil Kotler. There's nobody who has, you know, radar, the whole concept of radar, than Phil Kotler. He has marketing radar. He just kind of follows what is happening in the field and what the interesting topics are. And I do my best, but Phil's the master. And so that's the thing. And the thing you have to do, I think, and I've always done it myself, and I always tell my students to do it, is there's all kinds of trade press and writing that goes about marketing. And you have to read it. And you have to read, you know, whether it's Marketing Week out of the UK or Advertising Age or Ad Week out of the US. I know Turkey it has its own publications. There's international ones. In Wall Street Journal, it's, you know, in all different marketplaces. And I just read all that, and I really, you know, and we all, and Phil and I, and now Alex Chernoff, we all kind of keep track. And then we think about what are the major themes we want to bring in, and how do we update things, and then we figure out what we kind of cut out. But the thing that's interesting to me is how much marketing just evolves, you know, and changes, and that's what makes it fun and makes it interesting. You know, in just such profound ways. And especially now, I mean, there's just a lot going on, but that's basically how we do it. So we try to stay on top of the marketplace. And the thing we are a little careful about is there's a lot of fads out there. You know, people will say, you know, marketing is all about this. And sometimes, you know, that's not right. It's just, you know, they're trying to sell their own ideas in ways that probably don't make sense. So we do screen some stuff out where there's some concepts we feel just don't have, they're not legitimate. And we try to bring in as much academic content as we can too.
Okay, thank you. And we received a question from YouTube, and Hatice Genç is asking, the thoughts, expectations, and behaviors of consumers are changing very rapidly. Supplying products or services in line with demand is a necessary issue for the sustainability of organizations. So in this case, is it better to keep the logo constant while everything is changing, or is a new logo needed? What data should be analyzed if such a change is required?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. Well, the one thing, and again, I want to just, I'm going to answer this question in two ways, and one is kind of more answered indirectly than I'll answer it directly. But the indirect thing, the one thing to keep in mind though, when you talk about customers changing a lot and everything, just remember some customers are and some customers aren't, and you have to really back to the seventh point we made was about heterogeneity, differences, and you got to bear that in mind. So you always have to be kind of careful about that. That said, that doesn't mean then that you never change anything, because you have some customers who don't want to change things, because you're always going to have customers who never want to change a thing. And you can't do that. You can't, your brand will get stuck in the past, and you have to always be innovative. You have to always be relevant. You always got to be moving forward in a way that's is faithful to your customer base as a whole, recognizing there's some differences. So I think you can do, well, two things. When it comes to logos in your brand, you can always do, like Coke did, a short-term little promotion for certain things. Now, if you feel like you want to convey a change in strategy, then you can do something more fundamental that's more permanent and more enduring, but just be really careful about that. So for two reasons, I mean, you want to make sure it is a fundamental shift and change you're trying to communicate. You feel like for whatever reason, your brand identity isn't up to date, it doesn't reflect who you are now, and then you feel like you need to change. That said, make sure you understand what needs to be changed and what doesn't need to be changed, because usually you don't completely change things. A lot of times you're revising it in certain ways. And so it's really important to sort of understand the equity you have, the value you have, the equity you want to have, and the value you want to have, and how your brand elements and logos and other things can help you get there. But you better have a really good understanding so that you're not making changes that aren't needed or changes that aren't liked.
And I would like to actually add something. Nowadays, there is a trend, if the brand trusts in itself a lot, it doesn't even write its brand name. It just uses a logo like Starbucks does.
Right.
So what do you think about that? Is it a correct approach? Does it just show that it just shows its brand too much? It just trusts its brand too much?
Well, no, I think if the brand's strong enough, I don't think there are a lot of brands that are that way. I think there's some that are. McDonald's and the Golden Arches, people get it around the world. So there's some, and I think the reality is, like I said before, because of phones and everything, you're trying to simplify stuff some. So that's why you're seeing more of that happen. The part where I think it's a little more dangerous is if you're not as well known, and then you take, again, a brand name, logo, they're all brand elements. They're ways to identify and differentiate yourself from others. There's nothing special about a name, but names can be varied. They're specific. People maybe have learned them first. So just be careful that you have enough equity in the logo that you can drop your name in certain settings. Because otherwise, I don't want to do that. I don't want to run that risk that people don't know who I am and haven't done it. So I have to be a little careful about that.
Dear Professor Keller, thanks for all the information. What do you think AI practices in the future of marketing? And second question, who were winners and losers after COVID-19, after pandemic?
I'm sorry, what was the second question?
Who are winners and losers after COVID-19?
Oh, okay, got it. Yeah, AI is a great question, because I think there's going to be a lot going on with that. Kind of comes back to what we talked about earlier about the information. I thought, again, really great question about the very first question. about sort of where, with all the information you have now, that consumers have and companies have, and then AI, the things I can do, artificial intelligence to help guide decision making, because I'm learning from that data and being smarter. But it's going to come down to how it's applied in different ways, and I think that's going to be the challenge and the hope. And I think academics are going to be very important for that. The research we do as academics at universities to help industry, and industry has a lot of smart people doing a lot of good research too, but I think it's going to take all of that to develop AI in the right way, so that you really are making good, fair decisions and aren't, because that's the danger with AI, is that you take the data, but you just aren't using it properly and make decisions as a result that aren't what you would necessarily want to make. But I see a lot of opportunity there. And I think, again, we're kind of back to where we were 40, 50 years ago. They were called decision support systems. And there was like all this information that companies were gaining from the very beginning of kind of computing and other things. And how to sort of use that in a smart way. AI is taking that, way, way beyond. But I think that's the one watch out. And then the winners and losers. So it's interesting. The winners, the ones who really embraced digital 1 and 2, had inherently had products and services that could be consumed at home, that people would want to consume at home, that they didn't need, that public health wasn't a concern. Those were the winners, and there were a lot of them. The losers were the ones where public health posed a threat, constrained them in some ways, or and that wasn't their fault as much. What was their fault was if they didn't kind of understand and pivot to the digital opportunities as quickly as some of these other brands. And so the ones I thought who did a great job were the ones who figured out really quickly, I've got to learn how to sell online. I've got to do a lot more online than I ever did before. Even if that's the direction I was going, I'm going to accelerate that and be smart about that. And I think those are the winners. And I think the other thing I'll say, the judging and winners of this, it'll be really interesting 5-10 years from now. Looking back, how much did these 2 years, hopefully not a lot longer, 3 years maybe in total, how long is it, that period of time, how did it change the trajectory, if you will, of certain firms because of the way they had to react to and respond to the marketplace during this, this pandemic? And, there's now all kinds of economic, as we said, there's all this other forces going on, but who's going to be the one that kind of learn from that, change and then just take off? And I think we won't know that for 5-10 years. But I think that'll definitely be the case. We're going to look back at some brands and say that was really critical because they really changed things in a way to make their brand in a modern way kind of do better in the way things are headed, if you will, technologically, globally, socially, in all those different ways.
Okay. Kemal is our PhD student. Kemal, would you like to ask a question?
Good evening. Good evening. So based on all of these changes, do you think, Professor, that undergraduate and graduate education in the field of marketing will be changing in the near future? Thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's always, the content's always going to change. I think there's going to be two ways to look at it. I mean, one is we're always going to change our content. That's why we update our textbook. That's why we have these seminars. We're all trying to learn and get smarter and better and everything. One, and then two, the means by which we teach, I think, is going to be changing in marketing. Some, it's trying to figure out how to make marketing education more experiential. How do I get students to actually, the art and the science part, we put in textbooks, we can put on the blackboards or the whiteboards or whatever, but it's the art part where I actually learn how to use them and develop a philosophy and how do I kind of help students with that? I think that's what's going to change. Case studies were helpful, but it's how do I make them richer and do projects and other things where there's more contact with companies and opportunities to learn in that way. So outside the classroom, so I think there's going to be a lot of developments there. Obviously, online learning and trying to figure out how to supplement in-class learning and getting students together. So I think there's going to be changes. I don't know if it's going to be that much difference in marketing or management or finance or in different areas. I do think marketing benefits from that contact with companies, the experiences you get, maybe more than some of the others, possibly learning about consumers in certain ways. So I think there's some great opportunities there.
I see.
Thank you. Merve, would you like to ask a question? She is our research assistant.
Hi, Professor. I'm very pleased to meet you. Thanks again your participation and presentation. My question is that what is the role of branding in gaining a sustainable competitive advantage?
Yeah, I mean, I think to me that's the one thing. It's interesting. The brand's this intangible asset. It takes on a lot of meaning, so it can be a really nice competitive advantage because it's hard for a newer competitor to try to be as successful at competing sometimes because they don't have the heritage, they don't have the history, they don't have the character and the culture and other things maybe that consumers like about a brand. So I think it can provide a strong, sustainable competitive advantage. But the sustainable is the tricky part. I've got to invest, I've got to earn that day after day after day. I'm not endowed with this asset. It's not like I have this brand equity and I can put my arms around it. I can carry it around and say, oh, okay, it's, August 4th, it's August 5th, it's December 10th. I've got my brand equity. It's like, no, every day I have to find ways to satisfy customers, make them happy, better than competitors. And I've got to earn it because it can all go away. And there are these brands. I love to talk about these brands like MySpace, and Blockbuster and some of these US brands that were very popular 10, 15 years ago. And they're gone now, basically. They don't exist anymore because they didn't earn it every day. And somebody came along and said, we actually have a better way of doing things. So that's the thing I'd say about branding. I think it's really helpful and important. But you got to keep it strong. You got to make sure you don't take it for granted, if you will.
Pınar actually asked the question, do you think that metaverse will affect marketing strategies?
Yeah, I got asked this question. I did a seminar just the other day in India, and it was great as a nice business school in Delhi. And that was one of the questions I got asked. And I'll give the same answer I gave there. Great question. I haven't studied it closely enough yet, so I don't know. I think it will be interesting. I'm just not sure. I don't want to say anything until I kind of spend a little time with it and sort of understand it a little better and see what companies are doing or could be doing and all that. So I that's to be determined, I guess is what I'll say. It's a coming attraction. I haven't worked that out quite yet and thought about, I know it's out. I know things are happening and I'm tracking it some, but I haven't quite come up with an opinion yet. So I'm going to hold off on that. Great question. So sorry.
Okay.
Not such a good answer, but anyway.
Thank you. Merdam, would you like to ask a question? He's our research assistant as well.
Hello, Professor. Firstly, I want to thank you for presentation. Secondly, I want to ask you that what would be your general suggestion for today company leaders?
Yeah, I think the thing, I mean, in terms of leadership, especially marketing leadership, and part of it, it's marketing is such a people business, and it's people within the company, it's people outside the company. And I think the really successful marketers are those who really know people and really they empathize. To me, one of the most important characteristics of a marketing leader is the ability to empathize. And by empathize, it's the idea that I understand how you're feeling, how you're thinking. I can see things through your eyes. I can walk in your shoes. I can really project myself in there in a really, really real way. The best marketing, I think, leaders do that and understand that with consumers, and they understand that with their own staff and their own brand managers and everything, to kind of work with them and take advantage of their strengths and help them improve in their weaker areas, all of that. But I think, to me, I just think that empathy, because for empathy, you have to understand consumers, but it's more than that. You have to appreciate consumers, but it's more than that. You have to really kind of see things and think and feel the way they do. And I think the best marketers do that because that way you understand what customers want, what they don't want, what they like, what they don't like, and what their dreams and what their hopes are, what their worries are, what their fears are. And so that's the thing I think is, to me, I always come back to that. I think empathy is core. There are lots of other things about creativity and imagination, insight, you know, lots and lots of different qualities that matter, but that's my favorite one, I think.
And your last question, what are your suggestions for researchers in the field of marketing? What kind of research they can conduct? What are the most popular subjects could be?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I think the thing with marketing, there's so many things to look at. My suggestion is to try to find maybe some topics that some people aren't looking at. Sometimes because they're difficult and they're messy. And, you know, right now I think because there's so much data out there, a lot of people are getting data sets and, you know, doing different things, and that's great. You can get all kinds of learnings that way. But I would really try to find some of those topics that are maybe a little under researched, that are a little messier. And the thing I found, again, this was when I started working in branding, there weren't a lot of people working in branding. So it was a new area. And even when I was doing some work before that, when I was a PhD student, I was working I did a research, my thesis was on advertising and how packaging you could cue advertising on packaging in stores. And that's what I got interested in, how brand names served as a cue or reminder of advertising in the store, which is one reason I got interested in brands. But, you know, there wasn't a lot of people looking at that topic. So personally, I am interested in very practical topics that have managerial interest and value. And then I want to understand them from a deep academic way. In economics, psychology, sociology, anthropology, whatever the discipline is, to help understand that. And the more disciplines, the better. And so that's the way I look at it. And if you do that, then all you have to do is just talk to managers, read the press, and find out where they're struggling and where there's, and the other thing I've always found is in reading those is often I'll get ideas from what somebody talks about, or I'll see an example. I'll think, and that's how I started studying advertising and packaging, because there was a little ad campaign. There was a campaign for a cereal, Life cereal, and they put a little picture of the boy from the ad on the package, and their sales doubled. And I thought, why isn't everyone doing that? You know, it's like, remind people in the store about your advertising. So that's what got me interested. So anyway, that would be my advice.
Okay, dear Professor Keller, it's our honor to meet with you today. So thank you very much for making a nice presentation to us. So whenever you want to come, please let us know. We would like to see you in our university as well. And Elçin Hoca, she's our vice rector. She's going to make the closing speech. Buyurun Elçin Hoca.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Keller. As you know, this is our 30th Science and Society meetings, and we have valuable information about brands and branding, and especially future of brands. As you know, our university's name is Istanbul Ticaret University. In English, Istanbul Commerce University. So commerce is one of the most important issue for us. And if we are talking about commerce, brand is one of the most important parts. So it's a pleasure for us taking all those information from you on brand. And today we also have the opportunity to have the information about Professor Keller's recent published articles. Especially thank you for this. As Professor Karabulut tell us, it will be a pleasure for us if you come to Turkey, if we want to see you in our university in the future. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. And I hope that happens. That would be great. If that happens, I would really enjoy that. But I certainly enjoyed our time here and all the questions. So thanks so much for the chance to speak and to have such a great discussion about branding. So I really enjoyed it. So thanks.
Thank you very much. We wish you good luck, and we would like to see you as soon as possible. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Professor.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks now.
Bye-bye.